All right, let me shuffle some papers and push a couple of buttons and see what we can see and do what we can do. And let's go to the phones and see if right now we're being joined by United States Senator James Lankford. Senator Lankford, is that you?
It is, actually.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Good morning from rainy Washington, D.C.
Well, send us some of that rain. We need it.
You know what? I would love to bring it back. I'll try to leave the hurricane over here, but I'll bring some sprinkles at least.
Yeah, keep the wind, bring the rain. That's all we need.
Yeah, Oklahoma would be terrible if we had tornadoes and hurricanes, man.
You know what? We've had a hurricane before. Remember the big one in Wodonga about 10 years ago? So we've had it.
I do remember that. It was a sight to behold. I tell you what, though, we got to thank God above because this is the greenest I think I can remember seeing it this late in the year out in our parts of the world.
I have to tell you, I talked to the folks in the Panhandle that are used to saying they'll get as much snow as the sunflowers are tall, and they're a little worried about it this year because the sunflowers are 6 feet tall this year with all the rain.
Well, they better batten down the hatches. Well, a lot of things going on up on the Hill. First of all, did you get a chance to meet the Pope?
I did not meet the Pope. I was in the joint session when he spoke to our intimate small group of 600 or whatever that was there in the room. But that was about it. I didn't go steal his water afterwards. I didn't try to do a fake sneeze so he'd say bless you during it. I didn't do any of that.
Was there some of that going on up there? That's good stuff.
There was actually a member when he finished speaking went and took his water glass. That actually did occur, and I just had to smile.
Oh, yeah, that's good stuff right there.
You've been involved in some meaty stuff. Of course, the United States Senate always involved in meaty stuff, but particularly where energy is concerned. What is the status of the bill to lift the ban on crude oil exports?
So there's a couple different routes that are happening. I'm still pushing hard for the highway bill to be the vehicle to actually get it done. The House is doing a standalone bill on energy, which is a great bill, which we should pass, which this president would never sign. But it's a very good bill, very solid policy issues on it, and trying to set an energy policy for the country, which hasn't been established in decades. So that's on the House right now. The Senate has a version of it as well. But it'll be very difficult to be able to get that across the president's desk. In the meantime, there are two other bills that are quote-unquote must-pass bill, one of them being the highway bill, the other one the end-of-the-year spending bill that we're trying to get the oil export ban lifted on it. This is the time to do it, not only because of energy prices, because of jobs. Our folks need a steady income and to know they've got one more source they can actually sell to so we can get a lot of people and keep people working in the field right now. But the second thing is, while the president's working so hard to lift the export ban on Iran, we're trying to push and say, why would you keep America back when you're trying to allow Iran to sell their oil worldwide? And so that's in process right now.
All right. What's this about the press secretary at the White House? What is it that he had to say about the effort to lift the ban?
So Josh Earnest laid out kind of a stake to say the president's not supportive of this, and if the oil export ban is lifted, it should be the Department of Commerce that actually makes the decision on it, which was a very odd statement. This kind of goes back to if we're going to do a pipeline, I'm going to let the State Department make the decision if we're going to do international pipelines for the Keystone XL. Now he's saying if we're going to do a decision on oil exports, maybe we need to let the president. I think it's actually to Iran.
We're talking to United States Senator James Lankford this morning on the Big Chief Plant Services Exploring Energy Show. He's a Republican from Oklahoma City, currently in Washington, D.C., doing some business there in the United States Senate. All right, what is this resolution to nullify the expanded WOTUS definition? And first, tell us what the WOTUS definition is.
Most of Western Oklahoma is familiar with the phrase waters of the U.S. That's the WOTUS is the abbreviation for it that hangs out there all the time. But it is an old law that's 40 years old that the president's reinterpreting in a way that's brand new. The law says that the EPA has responsibility to deal with pollution in navigable waters of the U.S. Now, for most people, if I said navigable waters, what is that? They would say it's a body of water you can put a boat in and move from point A to point B in. That'd be a navigable water. Well, the EPA is trying to say any water that could get to a navigable water, they want to have oversight on. So if there's a stock pond that when it rains hard, if the water gets out of the stock pond and gets into a creek and gets into something else and then trying to floods down and could possibly get one day to a river, they want to manage that stock pond. They want to manage every low spot. They want to manage everything that gets anywhere close to any river or stream. It's an incredible broadening of their jurisdiction. So Inhofe and I both are working pretty hard to be able to press back on this. There's already been a court ruling to be able to press back on the EPA when they've laid this rule. The Corps of Engineers, that is actually the group that would be assigned to actually do the permitting on this, they've been pretty clear. They don't think this law is constitutional. Even in a rare moment, the President's EPA and the President's Corps of Engineers have been at each other on this, and the EPA is pressing on it. The Corps of Engineers is saying you're asking us to do something that's not consistent with the law, and we don't want to do it. So even internally in the Obama administration, they're fighting this out. This is very similar to the fracking rules. Many of your listeners will probably know that the President tried to create from the Bureau of Land Management brand new rules on overseeing fracking that are completely redundant with state regulations on fracking. So we're trying to create an additional layer on all federal lands. A court just yesterday actually blocked that and said that's not consistent with the law, what many of us have said. So these issues have to work through the courts. The President makes all these different declarations and puts out executive orders. We can all gripe about it. We can fight with our colleagues to try to cut it off, but ultimately the courts will look at the law and will say what everyone else sees. You don't have the legal authority to do that. You can't just make up the rules as President. You have to follow the law like everyone else.
So if this thing were to come to fruition in its current state, then anybody that had one of these tanks or ponds or whatever it is on their property, before they could do anything with that water, they would have to get permitting through the EPA, or
so it's construction. So take it where you've got a low spot. Maybe you've got a stock tank, and then there's a little ridge there where the water, when it floods out excessively, gets out. But most of the time, it's dry. Now, most farmers would think, okay, if I need to build a new road to another section line across my property, that's no big deal. You would just think I'm going to build a new road across my property and get that done. They would now say you've got to get a 404 permit from the EPA because that low spot that you cross could one day handle water, and we want to have a federal permitting across that now. So it's an incredible new reach of the EPA over private property rights and over individuals that want to do construction on their own property. But this affects oil and gas. This affects if you're going to put in a road out to any exploration where you're trying to complete a well, whatever it may be. There's an additional layer of regulations that are on it that's a far reach. So that's why we're pushing back. So Inhofe and I have got letters. We're actually working through the process legally on this. We've got to stop in appropriation bills that are set to come up in December to take the funding away from EPA on implementation. So it's an all-out assault on this, on the EPA from our side of it, to see what we can do to fix this.
Well, water's our most valuable resource. I appreciate your all's efforts in that, because that's borderlines on the ridiculousness. Who sits around and thinks this stuff up? You know, that's crazy.
These are folks that honestly don't like any kind of carbon being used, any carbon-based fuel, whether it's coal, natural gas, oil. They don't like any of it. And they're trying to do whatever they can to raise the price of it because it helps the prices in other parts of energy. And I don't mind all energy sources,
right.
Wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, bring it all. We need all the sources on it, but we do need all the sources. We can't just try to go squash one out that's our base fuel.
Unless they're Grizzly Adams, I bet there's not one of those people that could live without electricity being produced and the plastic from, it's getting me all riled up here. But I understand that one of these days the government would love to control what we wear every day, and just lay our clothes out for us. But I really appreciate the fact that we have gentlemen like yourself that are being statesmen and not politicians, because that's what this country needs now.
And we've got to get some of this stuff. One of the guys that I know here in D.C. Makes the comment, unless you're naked, living in a tree, living off nuts, you use petroleum products.
You'll give it.
Okay, so you just, it's in everything that we buy. It's in everything that we're around. People don't realize it's in your shoes, it's in your clothes, it's in your car, it's in your tires, it's what you burn in your car. It's the effectiveness of that one particular chemical has been so helpful to humanity in so many ways. And for whatever reason, there's a whole group that they're just adamantly opposed to that particular chemical that is a natural resource of the earth. This is not some foreign thing we're bringing in from Mars. It is a natural product as much as a tree is a natural product. And so we're trying to just bring some clarity to the debate.
Maybe we could find an island somewhere, that the EPA can control, that island and all the people on it.
I would pick the island. It'd be the island of Manhattan, actually.
We're talking to United States Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma City. And next week, Senator, you're going to introduce the Production Tax Credit Elimination Act. What is that?
This deals with wind power, actually. Again, I've mentioned to multiple folks, I'm not opposed to wind power, but about 22 years ago, there was a short-term tax credit that was put into place to be able to have wind power be able to get on its feet and to be able to be a good additional resource for us. Now, 22 years later, the wind power folks are doing an incredible job, very efficient power source now, and it's a good lifetime source that we're going to use for a very long time, not only in Oklahoma, but around the United States. It's a great, great source. The problem is that tax credit is still sitting out there, and every year we extend that tax credit, it is $10 billion to extend that tax credit. So while the wind folks say they would love to have it, I would tell you the federal taxpayers are at a spot to say we can't afford $10 billion a year to be able to subsidize an industry that is already well on its feet and is providing great clean energy for us. So my pushback is not against wind. It's a $10 billion pushback to say we got to be attentive to that. Give an example. We're working on a highway bill right now, and we're $10 billion short on being able to get a highway bill done. That $10 billion is sitting right over there in that PTC tax credit. And so there's just clear examples. When you're $426 billion short of your budget, you've got to be serious to be able to look at everything, and that is a prime candidate.
Have you gotten much pushback from the wind industry?
Well, you know what's interesting? I talked to some wind folks that have been at it for a long time, and they will tell me privately, we get it. We're at an efficiency rating at this point. We don't need it. We'd love to have it because obviously it's a great help for the profits of the company, and I'm not opposed to profits, but I am opposed to continue to damage the federal income. Now, there are other wind folks that will say, don't cut it off immediately. Give us a couple of years. My statement is 5 years ago, many of the wind folks told me if I just had 4 more years, we'd be totally self-sustaining. And now it's been 5 years, and they're still saying the same thing. We need the tax credit a little bit longer. What they really need, I think, is certainty. Tell me when it's going to end so we can plan as a company for it. I completely get that in their long-term planning, so I'm trying to lay out a marker and say, here's the date when it's going to end. Everybody put your house in order and be ready to go.
If memory serves me correctly, when this thing first started out, it was more about individuals putting up towers on their place to provide electricity for their farm operation or ranch operation and those kind of things. Isn't that what it originally started out as?
Well, it originally started out that, of course, decades and decades ago. You know, that ability, same as a lot of ranchers and farmers or folks at oil wells even, will have a little solar panel to be able to run either a gate or something else, just an individual. Of course, that's from decades ago and still is used in some ways today. But the PTC is really designed to be able to sell power onto the grid. So this is a larger scale manufacturing of energy, and so they can sell that energy on the grid at a cheaper price. So they can literally sell it with that tax credit. They can sell the energy into the grid cheaper than you can coal, cheaper than you can solar, cheaper than you can natural gas. And so it makes it more beneficial for energy companies when they're actually buying the electricity off the grid. It's cheaper for them to buy wind than it is anything else.
And Oklahoma gets, I think, 17% of its 15, a little over 15%. I mean, so one of the leaders in the nation as far as the percentage of electricity produced by alternative methods.
Senator, we've had the opportunity now to see 2 debates among the Republican would-be nominees for the presidency. So 2 have been on TV. They've been on the stump making speeches. You work in the Senate with a few of them. Do any of the candidates in particular tickle your fancy? Anybody rising to the top for you?
You know what? I've got several. I've not actually picked a horse in this race yet, but I do have several that I'm pretty partial to, just based on their work ethics and what they're trying to do. I'd tell you, I look at this just a little different for who I am personally and where I think the nation is. I have several criteria, not only policy criteria, just in some basic things, not only with energy policy, with tax policy, with trade policy, and education, some things that I look at very, very close. But I'm also looking at some character issues. I want someone who is a family person, who's passionate about their family, because I think that's the big issue we have in a nation right now, is our families. As our families collapse, our nation is collapsing around us. So I want somebody who's going to use the bully pulpit to talk about families. I want someone who's going to use the bully pulpit to talk about faith and is not afraid to talk about faith, because that's been a big issue in our country right now, is that people are losing track of faith. And this is a country where you can have any faith or have no faith. You're completely protected on that. But for whatever reason, we've hit a season in our country that people are trying to silence people of faith. And I think that's the wrong direction to go. And last thing is I want somebody that's going to be kind of like George Washington, to tell you the truth. Not with the tall white socks and the wig, but I want somebody who's going to be able to push power away. George Washington had this ability when people offered him power to say, not what a president would do, and he set a standard for the executive branch for 200 years, what it would be like. And we need a person that's going to be able to do that again, a humble leader that's going to walk in and say, that's not my job, that's the job of the legislature, or that's the job of the state, and will push power away from D.C. where it needs to be pushed away from.
I go back to this, and I may throw you a curveball here, Senator Lankford, but, you know, how people are able to pass laws up on the Hill that they are exempt from. How can people make conscious decisions to create laws that are good if they don't feel like that they should apply to themselves?
You know what's actually the good news on that? Most of that's just rumor. Most of that's not true. Just about every law, and I have a tough time thinking of one that's not true. Well, I can think of one on hiring, but just about every law applies to Congress the same as does everyone else. Like, for instance, I'm in Obamacare. The law required that I was also in Obamacare. I am in, my staff are all in Obamacare, and those wonderful exchanges that are out there with my family's in the thick of that. I still have to go through TSA. I'm still in Social Security. The only exemption that I know of that a member of Congress has is that I can hire people on my staff based on political party. So if I'm going to actually hire someone, typically you're not going to ask in an interview, Republican or Democrat. I can, because it's kind of important somebody philosophically agrees with where I am on that as well. But most of the laws, in fact, I can't think of one other than that doesn't apply also to members of Congress. So, Dan, that's a good thing. A lot of that changed in the 1990s. Actually, Newt Gingrich is the one who started that process, and it's taken about 20 years for some of those laws to actually catch up in application, but they are.
That's awesome.
It's good to hear.
Yes, it is. And one final deal. How much money do you think we spend each year in paying, well, retirement?
Retirement for members of Congress,
yes,
or just as a country?
Yeah, just, because isn't it my understanding is that once you're in, you receive your pension from that point forward?
You know what? If that was actually true, we wouldn't have to have term limits, because we would have folks get elected and immediately retire and go take their pension.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
I would actually vote to have that occur, because that would certainly help us right now to say, you just get immediate pension, have some folks retire and get out. It is actually not true. We have a retirement plan that's a lot like a 401k plan. It's called a thrift savings plan, where there's a 5% match. So if I put in up to 5% of my salary, the federal government also matches that to 5% to be able to put in this 401k. And then there's a pension plan that kicks in. I think it's after you have to be here 5 years in elected position. After 5 full years, you get some small amount. I think it's like 10%, 15%. Honestly, I don't even know the number, but it's a very small amount. But I've heard the rumor all along, as soon as you get elected, you have full salary for life on pension. It's not true.
That's awesome.
I don't know if that ever was true. I really don't know. I haven't looked backwards on it, but that is definitely not true now.
Well,
but again, I'd be willing to vote for that if a lot of people would go ahead and retire and take it.
Well, thanks for clearing that up for me, Senator. I appreciate it.
Another enlightening visit with United States Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma City. Senator, we're just about out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to next month's discussion.
Look forward to it. Take care, guys.
All righty. Bye-bye.